Hey, community fans, welcome to 6 Seasons in a Podcast. Too long, didn't listen. I get that podcasts are super long sometimes, and I just wanted to condense down some of these best episodes into maybe like 10-minute video so that you can listen and hear back some of the really amazing things that my guests have had to say. So this week, I'm going back to my interview with Andrew Guest, and I hope you enjoy some of the things that we talked about. Thanks. Bye.
I had been a writer's assistant and a PA and an assistant, and finally gotten my first staff writing job on a multicam before this show. But this was the first time I was a what's called a baby writer. I was still a staff writer,
Okay.
and it felt like a very special and unique place to be. In that the pilot. I mean, of all the things that were network pilots that year, something about Community really spoke to me, and I really enjoyed meeting Dan and got along with him really well and felt incredibly lucky to be a part of the show. And it was interesting in retrospect, 10 years later, that Dan wasn't the showrunner
Yeah.
on that show. And I probably wouldn't be the case today. I mean, there's so many shows being made, and there's so many inexperienced people who, I mean, he had quite a bit of experience already, and there's people with a lot less experience who are being given the reins of their own shows these days, but he was not. And Neil and Garrett, Goldman and Donovan were the showrunners. And it was interesting in our pre-production when we first sat down, you'd come into this room and we were all getting to know each other and trying to talk about the show, and none of us knew what the show. I mean, Dan obviously knew what the show was, sort of, but we realized that we didn't know what the formula was going to be, or what was episode 2. Obviously, the first few weeks we did what they called character camp, where we literally just would spend a day talking about Joel's character.
Yeah.
And then we would talk about what's Joel's relationship with Troy's character, and what's Joel's relationship with Gillian, and what's Joel, and that, in discussing them, little nuggets of story came up, and we sort of started accruing little bits of things that could eventually be episodes. The story about Donald Glover, which is so funny, is that he was so young when he got hired at 30 Rock that he literally, on his first week in pre-production on that show, was like, I have to leave for my other job. And they were like, oh, what's that? And he's like, I'm an RA at my dorm at NYU. And he was still an RA at his dorm at NYU. So the process is basically, when there's not a script yet, when we're just in pre-production and we're just starting from a pilot that's been shot, we discuss, you get the ball rolling on what possibly could be episode 2, and then as a group we're all still in one room together, and we're fleshing out, we call it breaking a story. You sort of start to think about, okay, this is an interesting idea for what could be an episode. How would it look? What would the first act break be? What would the second act break be? And obviously with Dan, we quickly got into a lot of Joseph Campbell stuff about the hero's journey and crossing thresholds and meeting with goddesses and things like that. But in any writer's room, you sort of flesh it out and together. So everyone knows what episode 2 is. Yeah. And then at a certain point, once it's pretty detailed, and you basically put it up on a whiteboard, you know what every scene is for sure, and probably some comedy that's going to take place in that scene, and what story-wise needs to happen before the next scene happens. Then that gets assigned to a writer, and that writer goes off alone to write the outline. That outline is brought back, everyone reads it, everyone has thoughts. Then once that outline has gotten through the approval process between the studio and the network, and they've given their notes, then that approved outline is given to that writer, and they go off alone for a week, let's say, to write their draft and come back and bring it, and we read it. So Liz Kukowski, I knew what Liz's story was before I went off on my script. I mean, while you're gone on that 1 week, the room keeps going. And at this point, there's probably 2 rooms going. You've got a group of maybe 10 or 12 writers who split up. You've got 5 in one room or 6 in the other. And one is rewriting the writer's draft of one episode that just came in, and the other is breaking the story for the next episode that's going to be handed out. And so that's sort of the process. So we are all in the loop to a great degree, except for when you're on draft and when you get a week alone to write, and then you sort of come back and get back in the loop. Dan wrote episode 2, and he basically never left the room. Like he was given the assignment. We had an outline that he liked, and he never handed in a script. And at a certain point, people started getting worried. We're getting close to pre-production, and I remember it took about 2 months for him to finally turn in what was most of a writer's draft, and then we helped him get it over the line. And that is, I've worked with a lot of showrunners. He's got his own particular way of doing things that is unique, and it's undeniable. The proof is in the product, and he is an incredibly brilliant person, but who is like, the Russos told a story about, I don't know how true this is, but like with the pilot even, that Sony was getting so frustrated that there wasn't a draft that Joe and Anthony had to go to Dan's house and sit with him to make him finish the pilot for Community. There's still a lot of the old versions of who these characters were. It took much of season 1, I feel like, for us to find the characters. And in particular, Britta was somebody who, and you can see that, honestly, I think Dan hadn't put too much thought into her as a character. Like, she's the object, she's the thing that Jeff's trying to get in the pilot, and she is like a pretty much of stereotypical, like, hot, cool girl.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of discussion with the network about recasting her. Because I think she wasn't really suited to that role, Gillian, the actress.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of Dan in the editing room finding moments and finding comedy that Gillian was suited to, and she became later one of the most fun characters to write for and one of the most interesting characters. And we hadn't quite figured that out yet. I feel like she's still pretty, like, there's some shading of like some darkness there and like self-hatred and like, but we weren't there yet. And she's still very much like we didn't have the right comedy wheelhouse. We didn't know what made her funny, certainly, yet.
How much of Ken, bring, what did he bring to that in your words? And
he bring a lot of it. I remember Chang was not in the pilot, and I feel like it was the Russos or Neil and Garrett who got very excited at the idea of casting Ken, because he had been in Knocked Up. He was a doctor in Knocked Up.
Yep.
And they just thought he was hilarious, and I remember not in this episode, but in the second episode, when the first Senior Chang scene, he was just sort of they just let him go. The Russos were both there. They let him go. And I remember Dan very rarely went to set and was not on set, but he did have a feed. So he could see on a TV in his office what was going on set, and he was getting so frustrated that this guy was just being allowed to go on and on and on, and a lot of it was improv. And so in these very early season 1 things, Ken is doing a lot of this, coming up with a lot of that himself. That is really Ken. And Chang became a problem later on in terms of like, part of what makes him funny is like his cartoonishness, but then like, how do you tell a real story about a fucking cartoon? It becomes very difficult. But at this point we were still enjoying the cartoon quite a bit. I worked on the first 2 seasons, and I came back for the finale of the Yahoo season, just as they needed some extra help. It was only 5 days, and I was like, how hard could it be? It's the last episode ever. And I got there 10 a.m. on Monday morning when the episode would start to shoot, and there was not a story. They hadn't even broken the story. Those 5 days were very hard. And it was nice to be there and sort of bookend the experience. And I got to know some of the people who worked on the end of the series and all those talented people. But yeah, it was
Did you
pretty
get to meet
funny
Rob
and intense.
Schraub? He's my hero.
Well, I had known Rob just
Okay.
through Dan and through the
Okay.
experience of like, yeah, he had, but yes, poor Rob Schraub at 10 a.m. was shooting empty hallways because Dan was like, I don't know, I might use them, and there was none of the actors were there, no one had lines, and no one had anything yet. We like started breaking the episode.